So we're right at the top of the hour and we'll get started. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you wherever you are. Thank you for joining our webinar today. My name is Elizabeth Kiamba. I'm a financial sector specialist at CGAP. And today we are here to discuss CGAP's research on the role of inclusive financial services in supporting the development of carbon markets, and more specifically, ensuring that carbon markets drive impact for people living in emerging and developing economies. In today's discussion, we will have a special focus on women, as we found limited research has been done on women in carbon markets. And we know very few project developers are thinking about gender. So we sought to understand the issues and potential solutions. And so we will share some of our early findings. Our agenda today includes a brief presentation of findings from our research. Sorry, just a second. Includes a brief presentation of findings from our research, after which my colleague Nisha will introduce our guest speakers and moderate a panel that will surface insights from carbon market stakeholders. We will then have a Q&A, but we encourage you to drop your questions in the chat as we go along. So let us start off. So for the past 1.5 years, CGAP has been carrying out research to understand the opportunities and the support needed for the participation of underserved and marginalized communities in carbon projects, carbon markets more generally. And we have been focused on understanding how financial services can promote more inclusive carbon markets. And as you may know, we have already published a working paper detailing our findings as of last November. We believe that the benefits of carbon markets can only be realized if they are inclusive. And that means that carbon projects need to, one, prioritize the equitable participation of communities. They also need to provide fair and transparent benefits sharing. They need to prioritize development impact beyond carbon removal. That is to say that they should achieve positive socioeconomic outcomes. And as a cross-cutting requirement for inclusion, carbon projects must promote gender equality and women's involvement. So women should have a say in projects design, in benefits sharing, and should also have equal access to project resources, and also benefit from the in form of the various development outcomes. And in terms of benefits for women participating in carbon projects, we have found evidence that green technologies such as off-grid solar and cook stoves reduce the drudgery and time spent by women and girls gathering fuel and cooking, thereby allowing them to pursue education and earn income from livelihood activities, thereby supporting women's economic activities. Our research suggests that in addition to enabling the use of affordable and clean energy, clean cook stove adoption can also drive positive health outcomes such as lower blood pressure in pregnant women, increased babies' birth weight, and reduced severity and duration of respiratory diseases in children. And this is not just, the benefits do not only come from green technologies or cook stoves. Nature-based solutions such as agroforestry or regenerative agriculture have shown that women can achieve greater food security, nutrition, and even earn income from carbon projects. In all of this, we see that women's involvement in carbon projects really enables them to participate and benefit from a just green transition. And women not only stand to benefit from carbon projects, but they are critical to the success of these projects. We know that women are agents of change and often influence the adoption of green technologies and climate-smart practices among peers and within their communities. And due to their heavy involvement in the agricultural workforce, as well as their vital role in activities such as forest management, women contribute to key project activities by providing labor, participating in MRV, that's monitoring, review, and verification exercises in carbon projects, and in other cases, as sales agents for green technologies. Evidence shows that including women in carbon projects can also improve climate outcomes. And a randomized trial found that forest user groups with a 50% gender quota conserved more trees and shared payments more equally. Unfortunately, women face barriers to participating in and benefiting from carbon projects. And when you have a look at these barriers that they face, we find that these are not particularly different from the barriers they face in accessing and using financial services. So, for example, the barrier around the limited land rights and decision-making, it makes it difficult for women to have ownership and control over their carbon. Inadequate access to information and capacity building limits their ability to benefit from the new technologies, from projects, and from accessing market opportunities. Again, time poverty, which we've seen to be an issue, can severely limit their participation in project activities as well as decision-making processes. Discriminatory gender norms and power dynamics often exclude women from project governance and benefits sharing arrangements. Again, the lack of gender-responsive project design may expose women to unintended harm such as domestic violence and threats from male community members or household leaders who feel excluded from project benefits. But we find that women-centric financial services can help to address these barriers. We found a few examples of very simple financial solutions, but those that were tailored to women. And I'll share some of the examples with you. So, for example, the Khasi Hills Community Red Plus project in India uses carbon revenues to provide grants to women's self-help groups, which is a form of VSLAs, Village Savings and Loan Associations. And loans from those self-help groups have helped the women to take a leading role in the carbon projects, as well as earn additional income. And they use those loans to establish tree nurseries that supply saplings for the carbon project. This points to an opportunity also for the formal financial service providers to innovate around similar solutions. In India, SEWA, the Self-Employed Women's Association, provides women with tailored loans that enable them to participate in and control the benefits of carbon projects. The organization offers loans to women seeking to acquire biodigesters or solar-powered water pumps with carbon revenues either directly shared with customers or being used to reduce the cost of the asset. Fair Climate Fund, which is a carbon project developer, uses digital payments to transfer revenues directly to women's accounts to maximize their control over project benefits. This ensures the delivery of revenues from the sale of cookstove credits to women who have actually invested their time and energy into, achieving the mitigation outcomes. In addition to the important role that financial services can play in carbon projects, we found that carbon projects that prioritized women and that maximized gender impact had an even greater opportunity to monetize that impact. And as noted earlier at the beginning of the presentation when I presented our framework for inclusive carbon projects, inclusive projects must deliver development impact beyond emissions avoidance and removal. And this development impact is known as core benefits, which should be aligned with the SDGs. Carbon projects can monetize these core benefits, and our research shows us that gender impact is one of the most highly sought after core benefits. Carbon credit buyers are increasingly demanding carbon credits that demonstrate clear evidence of impact for women and are willing to pay more for these credits. However, we see a problem. We see that the lack of quality data creates barriers to the measurement, reporting, and monetization of core benefits. And carbon projects that report core benefits tend to vary widely in the granularity of their data, the level and types of details that they include in their reporting, the SDGs that they prioritize, and the evidence of the long-term durability of the impact. This lack of transparency in data creates challenges for buyers and investors in identifying the most impactful projects. And of course, ultimately, this hinders financial support for truly effective initiatives. While on the supply side, it makes it difficult for projects with truly durable, high-quality core benefits to distinguish themselves. And so, having taken you through the opportunity, the challenges, we find that there is still more work to be done and more research needs to be done to understand the role of women in carbon markets and how they can continue to benefit and how we can find innovative solutions to address the challenges that they face. And so on that note, I will highlight the 3 ways that CGAP is working to support more gender-inclusive carbon projects. The first is that we are working on developing technical guidance for funders to support gender impact in carbon projects. We are also exploring innovation in women-centric financial services that enable women to participate and benefit from carbon projects. And finally, we are exploring solutions that can improve the measurement and monetization of gender core benefits in carbon projects. So I hope that has given you a taste of the high level, the early insights rather from our research. And at this point, I will hand over to my colleague Nisha, who will introduce our guest speakers today and moderate a panel discussion that will dig deeper into some of these insights. Over to you, Nisha.
Thanks, Liz. If you could just move to the next slide while I introduce my speakers. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and Liz for that overview. We have a great lineup of speakers and experts to dig a little bit more into this topic of what makes a gender-inclusive carbon project. How do you address this issue of transparency that Liz mentioned, and what is already being done. So our speakers, I'll start with Hasib from Climate Focus. He's a lead consultant and also worked with us on a research study looking at co-benefits and what is the landscape of co-benefits in carbon project over the last year. We then have Jeanette Gorang, who's the executive director of WOCAN and a leader in the climate and gender space and founder of the W+ standard, which you'll hear more about. I'm not going into their full bios. It's on the webinar page. And finally, we have Sandeep Roy Chaudhary, who's the co-founder and director of Value Networks, VNV, and he is our project developer and will tell us some share insights around why he thinks women are key to successful carbon projects. So I'm going to jump right in. And Hasib, the first question is for you. So Liz sort of set this up and presented some of the findings, but from your vantage as a researcher, carbon projects often are required to report on multiple SDGs. Where do you see the value and the opportunity of focusing specifically on gender equality, which is SDG 5? What are you seeing in terms of the trends around that?
Thanks, Nisha. And also thank you, Liz, for setting up that overview so nicely. Generally, carbon projects are designed to generate carbon credits, right? And SDG benefits are additional outcomes of the activities of carbon projects. But in the past few years, the largest carbon market standards, like the gold standard for the global goals, VEDA, and others, require projects to demonstrate other SDG outcomes beyond climate action, which is SDG 13. And that's great. However, planning, monitoring, and reporting SDG contributions can be costly. They require resources. Of course, this depends on the project and project type and location, but generally those additional activities means additional costs. But fortunately, as Liz mentioned, carbon projects with higher quality SDG contributions can also attract higher prices for the carbon credits, which is great, and also add to the credibility of the project developer, and the buyers of carbon credits from those projects. And this is where SDG 5 is unique in several ways. First, in many projects, especially those focusing on households and communities, such as clean cooking, biodigesters, small-scale agriculture, and others, women play a central role in the implementation and the success of these projects, because they're not just passive beneficiaries of project activities, but also active implementers of project activities. They use these technologies. They support the project developers and implementers in the process. Additionally, women are also part of the project development and project implementation team in a lot of projects, where they are sitting in the management bodies of projects. They play the role of trainers of beneficiaries of the project. They supervise teams. They are also surveyors and monitoring the project activities and so on. So stronger role for women in projects can deliver multiple SDG benefits and not just SDG 5. It can benefit the economic and general well-being of the family, because women are the head of families in many communities where these projects are implemented. So supporting SDG 1, SDG 2. It can also benefit the health and well-being of children, because women can save more time, hence additional income for the education of their children, especially girls, which is a big issue in a lot of communities and countries where such projects are implemented. Women can also have more time for their own education and further development of their career, again, supporting or contributing to SDG 8 and SDG 10. So in general, SDG 5 is unique because it can contribute to so many other sustainable development goals and outcomes for local communities, for the country, and globally. Therefore, stronger role for women beyond carbon projects can contribute to the well-being of community and the country, as they are half or more than half of the population. I'll stop there and
Great, thanks,
back to you, Nisha.
for reinforcing some of those messages and sharing a little bit more detail. Sandeep, I'll turn to you as a project developer. How does what, Hasib shared about the roles women play, as well as the point about, carbon projects generating more value, the credits themselves when women are included, do you see examples of that? So over to you.
Yes, I would. Do I see examples of, and first of all, thank you for having me here. I think from an example perspective, I still worry about how much the buyers actually value this, and I look at it as a core benefit, not as a co-benefit. Why do I say that? Because the gender piece in most kind of projects, I wouldn't say all kinds of projects. If you're talking about nature-based and household energy-based or anything like that, for us, the gender piece is a tactical strategic move in terms of increasing the permanence of the project. So if you really look at ecosystem restoration, for example, you're talking about a 20, 30-year horizon. I mean, that everybody needs to get involved, and every, that includes the girl child to the woman to everybody. So I think from our perspective, more than the price, I think the carbon credit itself, the permanence of it depends on this. And this cannot be, in my opinion, kept to be spoken about as a core benefit. I think this is the core benefit. For the longest time, I think we've reduced mitigation to just CO2. And that, for me, I think the carbon markets is a great way to use mitigation finance to fund adaptation. And when the moment you talk about adaptation, you are talking about gender and every other social class possible. So for me, I think this is more of strategic business, risk management, all of this. And this is not just a, oh, great thing to have, you know. And I think that's very important to understand, to make this a core benefit of project design. Whether buyers really appreciate that today or not, I'm on the fence on that a little bit. And I do think we need to get a bit more scientific about the gender claims that we make and move beyond SDGs. And SDG 5 is great where it is, but I think we are living in a world right now where we have to break it down even further. So what do we mean, you know? And for me, you know, time saving, financial, digital payments, it's all great. But at the end of the day, we need to make more sustainable gender solutions within a carbon program. And that sustainability is building enterprises, building, you know, more financial products into the system. And that carbon credit is a great way to do that, because it's not really a debt or an equity kind of an infusion. It is a great financial product to make things, you know, make market linkages, financial linkages. And I would rather take that approach than just cash benefits, because for me, that builds something which is more long lasting and could possibly be intergenerational. So that's how I would look at it. To answer your first question, do buyers pay a premium on it? I think they should. But do all of them do it? I am not too sure they do it. And I think that the whole nature of the markets at times is a competitive pricing landscape, which I don't think it should be, given that, you know, it should be a climate target of a corporate basis, what they do. And CO2 can't just be the only outcome that you want out of your carbon credit, to be honest. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sandeep. And we'll get into more about the financing piece, but I want to turn to Jeanette, and, you know, talk a little bit about, you know, this issue of transparency and impact measurement and quantifying that. She's been at the forefront of that for a long time. So, Jeanette, you know, you're the creator of the W+ standard, so maybe you can tell our audience a little bit about it, and, you know, why it was created, and what is the link to carbon credits that you see.
Thanks, Nisha, and thanks, Liz, and thanks for this invitation, and to all the people attending. We're thrilled. This is starting to become something of interest in so many circles. So WOCON is 20 years old, and we're a group of largely women, also some men across the world, who are first and foremost experts in agriculture, natural resource management, coming at gender from that perspective. And we have been for many, many years doing gender mainstreaming training, integrating gender into these agriculture and resource management organizations, with the belief that this could be part of the theory of change, influence the way institutions incorporate gender right from the get-go, as well as out to the projects. I think it was about 2014 when we looked backwards and we said, you know, this is not having the intended outcome. This is not changing the behaviors of project developers and projects in this sector. So we started to think a different approach was needed. And also, I should say, for WOCON, one of our primary missions is to create more financial and technical resources for women at the grassroots level, but also women's collectives, women's organizations up and down the chain, because it's our belief that this group of people is very much neglected in all sorts of financial decisions. So at the time, we were learning about carbon markets and carbon, and it was really attractive to us for a couple of reasons. One, the idea of measuring outcomes, evidence-based outcomes, and not just measuring inputs and outputs. That was like an aha moment to us. But more importantly, I think for us, with two things that we saw carbon market model could provide, which was, one, the incentive structure to project developers like Sandeep and so many others, that if we could make this profitable to them, and again, based on the price, would that incentivize a different kind of behavior that would orient more resources towards women's engagement and benefits. But two, most importantly for WOCON, was the fact that we wanted to see this as a potential new stream of revenue to these women's collectives. And we did that by, so we said, we're not going to measure carbon, we're going to measure women's empowerment. And unlike the other carbon standards, we are going to require a benefit sharing mechanism of this. It's going to be the percentage, 20% now, for out of the price of carbon that goes directly to these women's collectives. So I'll stop there.
Great, thanks. And you can find more information about W Plus on the WOCAN website. We'll drop a link. But you know, the benefit sharing innovation, so to speak, in W Plus is something I want to pick up on. And Sandeep, turn to you. So you know, you just spoke about like there's more value in thinking about how you use the resources that are going back to communities, you know, to create permanence, to create pathways for livelihoods. Can you talk a little bit about how you see, you know, the role for financial services in this, you know, more equitable benefit sharing so that women can really, you know, get the money, but then also use it to build their own lives and livelihoods?
Yes, thank you. And I think that's for the carbon markets to make a difference, it has to be at scale. I'm appreciative of micro scale initiatives, but they all aggregate to a larger scale program. And I think the mainstream financial system has to come in as a blend finance into the carbon finance system. And that is the only way to really scale programs. And this is not just for gender, any kind of program, I would assume. Now, the thing is, with gender, what happens is because of, let's say for agriculture projects, most of the women, the land is not in, the land title is not in their names. So they have zero access to insurance, zero access to any kind of what I call is adaptation finance. Their crop insurance, for example, it is generally in the men of the household, their names, and you know, so benefits to flow down to women is quite difficult in a regen ag program, for example, because the carbon waivers are coming from the male of the household. Yes, you may have them in the meetings for representation, but that does not mean anything. So her whole idea is how could you work with that, you know, and for that the financial system technically will never lend to that woman in this current form that it exists. So you have to get a bit more innovative, and that's where groupings come in, collectives, self-help groups, microcredit. And this we have seen working, you know, not just for energy projects, but also nature-based projects. So I think the larger financial system can play a role. The carbon finance can bolster up balance sheets of these collectives. And the more you bolster up the balance sheets, the more mainstream credit comes into the system. And for me, then you have a multiplier effect within that entire grouping. And that could be livelihood based. It could be, you know, small enterprises. It could be small micro credits. I don't know what the micro level of a microcredit might be, but these are important things that can be supported by carbon markets. For example, a small helper group in an agricultural setup will need warehousing. This warehousing today, they cannot access any public subsidy system because the land is not in their names, nor is the crop being sold in their name. So all of this is quite important for energy devices as well. So mainstream finance can come in two facts. One is the average banking, the way mainstream banking works, which will never lend to such high-risk groups on their own. They lend to microfinance, but then they need to get their money from concessional capital, MDBs, et cetera, et cetera. So for me, that is how it would typically trickle down. And the carbon finance kind of fits in quite seamlessly into either interest rate payments or making more linkages possible, because that money needs to come from somewhere and it's not going to come, you know, from thin air. So for me, these are quite important aspects, because a carbon project can recognize rights where the normal financial system will not. And this recognition is quite important for then the financial system to piggy ride on this recognition, if you know what I mean. So this way, you could build more structure into the financial system for gender financing, especially at the adaptation level. For me, that's because most of our food is grown by women. You know, they are the ones who are working on the farms after cooking and doing all of that, you know, and somehow they are left out of this entire public finance system. Carbon finance can structure them back into the system. And that's what we should be aspiring for as a long-term sustainable solution that is carbon market driven.
Great, thanks, Sandeep. I'll go back to you, Jeanette. You know, from your perspective, because you've had this requirement in the W Plus standards around benefit sharing, what do you see as, the role of financial services, whether it's formal or informal? How have you seen that play out? And where do you see the opportunity? Because I think, we know that I think the because of the challenges Sandeep just mentioned, the mainstream financial system currently doesn't actually work the way we want it to.
Yeah, exactly. And I agree with Sandeep. Getting it to scale is the challenge. But the good news is also there's a movement even within the carbon markets to move towards high integrity carbon credits, which increasingly involves things like women's empowerment. I see VCM Lydia Ruiz is on the call, the gender person from them. They've tried to integrate it into the system. But the financial services piece of it is interesting. And because we can link the W+ standard to a carbon standard, not necessary, but it's a possibility. That also for project developers offers them opportunities to play around with financial services. There are also cases, and Sandeep knows this, of projects where the carbon side of it may not be able to produce a very large revenue. However, it could be things like the co-benefit revenue could actually be higher than the carbon revenue, depending on the nature of the carbon that you're measuring. I want to talk about one carbon project developer who used the W+ standard in Brazil. And it was interesting to us because she used the W+ because she was, I think, having trouble getting a good price for her red credits from her agroforestry project. She learned about the W+ and realized that she could gain a different revenue chain from there. And so she chose to sell her credits as standalone W+ measurement. She sold those credits, gained the revenue from that, plowed it back into the project to increase the size of the number of beneficiaries. And now in the next phase of it, she will link it to carbon credits because the market seems to be more favorable now to that point. So yeah, I think also the point that we hit on is, again, the land tenure. W+ does not require land tenure rights of its beneficiaries. So it's another way to get around this requirement within that. I think that if it can be used for scale, then, the dream here is that at scale, we would be able to generate a significant number of resources through that benefit sharing mechanism that would indeed also be using climate mitigation financing for adaptation finance. And this for us would be something we could start to require that women who are receiving those payments were using it for adaptation benefits. I think that's not a problem for us. We declare it has to be used for their self-determined use of that money. But adaptation is such a wide supply of such a wide and broad category that we think it would be fine. But the flow of the funds, and this is where, I think CGAP's role comes in. The flow of those funds needs to be monitored, transparent, and acceptable to local women, but also acceptable to the buyers that we're increasingly here say to us that they are interested in that piece of it, not just all the other attributes of buying a credit. But the fact that by doing that, they can be assured that there's a concrete contribution that goes directly down to local women within the projects.
Great. So yeah, I think, it's the gender outcomes can help carbon projects be better carbon projects. W+ offers a great way to measure and monetize those gender outcomes in itself beyond the carbon credits. And part of what we're trying to look at is when you bring these together, as you just mentioned in the project in Brazil, can that actually increase the value of what goes to women and create these pathways for, improved livelihoods through adaptation, etc. So I think, all very positive messages, but taking it to scale seems to be a bit of a challenge. I wanted to come back to this issue of, there are broader market initiatives such as the CBCMI. And, Hasib, I wanted to ask you from your perspective, what do you see as opportunities for project developers to better align the gender outcomes? You mentioned that, because they have beneficial effects that lead to other SDGs, how can they align to these kinds of market initiatives? What is needed to move forward with that?
Thank you. Before I answer that, I just wanted to come back to a point Sandeep mentioned and reiterate that, yes, indeed, gender should be the core of carbon market projects, but it's not. Right now, the focus is carbon and carbon credit. That's the commodity that the projects generate, and that's the commodity on the market that's sold. And the activities of projects are financed from the money made from those carbon credits. But ideally, they should, and the gender, sustainable development, and well-being of community and women should be the core of all projects. And that's where the role of MDBs, the role of public finance, the role of development aid in general plays in. There should be a convergence between carbon markets and these other development aid or development programs. We know that the World Bank and others support millions of farmers all over the world. However, these farmers are now trying to access carbon market finance, but there are hurdles in terms of the methodologies needed, the standard, developing those projects and monetizing the carbon benefits from those projects. So I totally agree with both Sandeep and Jeanette that there needs to be an alignment and convergence between the two streams to support development, but also specifically in this case, women. And to answer your questions, yes, VCMI, ICVCM, and other bodies working on enhancing the integrity of carbon markets do emphasize on the quality of carbon credits and the other sustainable development benefits of projects, including gender. And ICVCM, for example, emphasizes the use of W+ as a separate standard to measure and monitor and report gender outcomes. And in order to align with these increasing requirements as well as expectations from these integrity bodies or oversight bodies, I think it's important for project developers and investors to make sure that women are included from the beginning and intentionally included in the project design and the management of project and project activities, and not just passively, as Sandeep mentioned, just ticking some boxes or inviting them to some workshop and then forgetting about what happened. The projects should design project activities with clear roles for women. So what kind of project activities need to be in place to support women and the participation in the project, and ensure that the SDG contributions go beyond project activities required only for carbon generation or carbon credit generation to enhance the capacities, the resources for women to improve their lives and lives of their families, and implement or put in place mechanisms that can contribute, that can continue to support women beyond the project lifetime. So ensure sustainability of the SDG 5 or other SDG outcomes. For example, investing or supporting local institutions for education, health, and other institutions that can support women in long term. But again, this means more costs, and that's where the investment and the role of investment and other sources of income, finance like public finance, whether it's micro or bigger, come into play. So they need to be brought in early on in the project developing as investors and supporting project activities that go beyond carbon credit to ensure sustainability of SDG outcomes in long term. Let's stop there.
Great,
Thank you.
thanks. So Sandeep, Hasib shared, some of the things that need to be done by project developers. And as a project developer, I'm sure there's a lot of challenges because beyond cost, what would be on your wish list? What would be the first thing that needs to be addressed to design and develop the kind of projects that are, showing impact for women in all of the ways that you described.
I mean, first thing, I mean, and apart from the finance piece, which is, I think, a very important piece, not just the cost of the credit, it's also cost of capital that goes into a project, and both are kind of interrelated. When we talk about benefit sharing, we almost forget that some of the projects need very high capex, and if that comes at a very high capital cost, then a lot of that will be eroded by the cost of offtake. So your benefit sharing goes for a toss, really, because I was just doing some math. Or a capex heavy ARR project, even if I get $40 a ton, out of that, about $28 goes towards the bank who financed the project in the first place. So what are we talking about in benefit sharing? So we need to be clear about these ideas about benefit sharing. But having said that, that's on the financial side. What are the challenges of a project developer? We are in a lucky place where we can possibly, because, you have a portfolio of projects, you can hire teams, you can do that. But that's not the market. The market needs to be more democratized. It should be in a position where everybody can access finance and get a premium on their projects basis gender outcomes. And that's why I'm a big believer in W+, because, that's something Jeanette knows. We've been speaking about that for almost 6-7 years now, on why we need a specific standardized way of monitoring an outcome and monetize that outcome. Now, not all companies or project developers will have the capacity to do that, including us. If you have a template or something, because we are used to developing projects, that's what we do. We are not gender specialists. So we would rather have that as one of the, and I hate to use the word plugin, but that's what typically it should look like, a plug-in system where I say, guys, this is the framework, this is what we follow, just how we follow a carbon standard. Here is the standard, here is how you monitor it and get it done. That's easier for a project developer to do and also scale. A forest conservation project developer understands forest conservation. When you put the gender piece in there and say, guys, but you're getting a premium for the gender, they'll be like, yeah, but I don't really know what to do. And that's where you end up either ticking an SDG box or inviting some women to a meeting and documenting it and saying, oh, this is participatory. It's absolutely nonsense. So the thing is, how do we get that framework more standardized, more democratized, and have a market for it? But let's get the design and the standard right, and then we move on from there. And I think that will democratize this entire gender space. For this, I mean, for me, carbon markets is the most purest form of result-based financing. You are paying for a result. Now, when you're adding that gender result to it, it is not, you're paying for the result. And that is something I think most donors, bilaterals, multilaterals, everybody has to understand. And that is where the markets can play a big role. You're paying for an outcome. If the outcome's not there, you're not paying for it. And that should be understood, I think, in the larger financial piece.
Great, thanks. So I see you nodding vigorously, Jeanette, to what Sandeep said. So maybe, W Plus is a framework and a way to measure these outcomes and monetize it. What are some of the challenges from your perspective? Because it's been around for a little bit, but to get it to that next level and make it part of more, mainstream carbon projects and really get the, outcomes monetized and the money going to women.
Well, I'm nodding vigorously because Sandeep stole my words, which is wonderful. A project developer does that. But really, I think a big challenge is exactly what he said, which is carbon project developers do often not know what the heck to do to achieve women's empowerment outcomes. I'm a forester by training. I've been in this business for decades, and it's just if they're not familiar with it, they don't know what it looks like, and they don't know what to do. So I think the other benefit of the W+ standard, and it's rigorous, it's not easy. And one of the challenges is everybody saying, oh, let's make it cheap and easy. Well, heck, I don't know if it can be, right? But we're open to ideas about this. But, basically, we need to see the intentionality of a project. So it's got to go beyond, like Sandeep said, the putting women in the committees and all this. What is the long term? We can accept the fact that that's where you are right now. No judgment. We're going to take a project where you are right now, and we're going to make sure you have an action plan, a gender action plan. It's a requirement of the standard to get you beyond where you are now. Also, the standard sets the baseline. It's just like carbon. You got to show where you are in order to get credit for where you want to be. So we require that. We require this, it's rigorous in that sense. It also requires a lot of consultation with local women of the community. Is this project going in the way they want it to go? Can they provide more suggestions of how that happens? So all of that happens. This requires some, I would call readiness funding, because that's the term used, of course, in the Green Climate Fund and everything else. We just had wonderful meetings at the GCF. I'm very optimistic about this, where if large climate funds like the GCF start to move towards an outcome-based measurement and reporting, which they are, and then even start to tie that into payments, which they are potentially. I mean, I know I'm kind of speaking out of turn here in a way, but this could be really exciting. And then there could be this kind of upfront finance that's going to, it could come from a fund, it could come from a blended financial instrument that where the TA facility and the TA funding provides the cost of the measurement and verification. That alone would bring a lot more project developers into the space who are right now talking to us and sitting on the fence, because there's not a mature market for this. So project developers who are looking at their costs and benefits are thinking, can I afford to do this measurement verification? What's going to be the outcome in the end? And of course, these are, ideally, we would have uptake agreements that would, from buyers right from the beginning, who would say, we agree to a certain price for a carbon with a W+ credit, and we will advance some of that money. Particularly, this would be important for women who are project developers. This is something where is kind of our own dream that we would love to see. Why are women themselves not being in positions of managing carbon projects? Why not? And we would like to see how that happens. And of course, they will have even more problems getting that a kind of additional upfront financing. So offtake agreements by committed buyers who are ready to take the leadership role and move forward.
Okay, great. I'm going to open it up to the questions in the chat that have been coming, and they're coming in from multiple perspectives given the nature of this conversation. But I wanted to see if Sandeep and Hasib, you had one last thing you wanted to say before I start channeling some of those questions for discussion.
Yeah, I wanted to quickly jump in on the challenges. I think the main challenge I see is demand for SDG aligned projects or SDG outcomes or SDG benefits, however we want to call it, whether SDG 5 or others. Market logic as it is the demand drives supply. And right now, as Sandeep was saying, he said he's on the fence, but I'm also on the fence. I'm not sure if there is a lot of demand for SDG outcomes as an extra, whether it's commodified yet or not, as an extra benefit or outcome of projects. Because we have rigorous methodologies for some of the SDGs, including SDG 5, as we saw, W+, but also other SDGs under the gold standard and VERA, which, they calculate the SDG outcomes very rigorously. I mean, they have, of course, issues, but the best available methodologies out there are there to quantify SDG outcomes that can be then commodified and sold on the market. But right now, those are still very niche. There's not a lot of demand in the market. So I think we need to educate buyers. We need to create more awareness on why SDG 5 or gender outcomes or other SDG outcomes are important for high integrated carbon markets and not focus only on carbon credit or climate outcome of projects. I see that as a challenge, but it's, I think, a good challenge move forward. Work by CCAP and others will hopefully address that. Thanks.
Thanks, Hasib. Actually, related to that, I'm going to pick up one of the questions from the chat. And while we've been mainly our work, and I think a lot of you were focused in the voluntary carbon market, this question is more about, are there recommendations for, creating those incentives through policy by institutionalizing, some kind of gender responsive measures in policies in the compliance market, as a part of Article 6. Any thoughts on that? Whoever wants to go first.
This is a tough one. I was reading it and I was trying to, think in my head what the answer could be. And I think we need to first get it right in the voluntary markets, because if anybody has to, because in a compliance market, a ton is a ton. It's always a race to the price. At the end of the day, it really doesn't matter where that ton comes from. So if it's compliance and if it's eligible for a taxation or a retirement, somebody will pick up something without really valuing that extra core benefit, as I call it. So I think let's start with the voluntary markets first, because, and that is something that I like in a way that, because I also, and picking up from Hasib's point, even if there's no demand on the buyer side, we think there is a space for impact investing into this space as a blended finance model, because again, this is an outcome. So if you're looking for a gender outcome, and if you're plugging into a carbon project, yes, you're spending less money for a greater outcome, you could revolve that fund as well. So there are different ways of doing it. So I would stick to the voluntary market for now on this one. I think compliance because it's a ton is a ton, and we've seen compliance markets before as well. I think yes, as a part of the safeguard, this should be part of anything to do with 6.4, 6.2, or any kind of Article 6 mechanism. But yeah, I would stay away from getting into the pricing element of it.
If I may quickly add to that, but not particularly from an Article 6 point of view or a compliance market point of view, but broadly, I think governments need to mainstream gender across their policies, whether it's for regulating carbon markets or whether it's for policies across different sectors. We need to mainstream gender. And as part of the Sustainable Development Goals and reporting on those, we see that countries are doing that, or at least reporting that they're doing that. But requiring market actors to also consider mainstreaming gender in their activities, I think that's the next step. I'm not sure. I don't have any resources to quote, but I'm hoping that we are moving towards that more from a public policy perspective than carbon markets.
Great. I'll move on to another question from Lydia. I don't know if you've seen it, but she's talking about, validation verification bodies play a key role in validating and verifying carbon project processes outcomes, but their assessments often overlook the gender-related risks and benefits. So any thoughts specifically on how VVBs could improve and ensure gender considerations?
Could I come on that quickly before Janet is
No, go ahead,
for it.
go ahead.
I do think, the very fact that we have Woken on the table here and the very fact that we are getting into this, I do not think, and I have utmost respect for VVBs, please don't get me wrong, but they're not equipped at this point of time to measure gender outcomes. And I think that should be left to specialists unless we add that into a VVB's portfolio, which is going to be quite difficult on them. They have a lot of things to check anyway. And I do think certain outcomes, and we should pick up 2 or 3 different outcomes, which cannot be audited, and just be okay with that. And say, guys, this should be audited by a certain specialist body. And we keep it like that. I think it would be for the betterment of the market, in my opinion, and not thrust everything into that VVB's desk. They just don't have the expertise. And I don't think they should. VVBs are supposed to check methodologies, safeguards, and a bazillion things. I think that's my opinion, and yeah.
See, I'm so glad he jumped in before me. Exactly, right? Gender is not this simple thing you just check a box. Too much box checking already gone on. That's the pink washing. That's dangerous. That's risky to any project who's just going to allow something like that. So VVPs who don't have the right training, measuring carbon it's a thing, right? It's not like people. It's much more complicated to measure, verify, and get at the nuances behind gender outcomes. And so I agree. I don't see, and even my own team of advisory people who are carbon experts and VVBs said, do not expect a carbon Project VVB to be able to do this. And I think that's correct. So Lydia, to your answer, I don't really know. We've got to build this whole ecosystem. That's, I think, the answer. And it's going to start with the demand. We need to have the demand. If we can build a demand and scale this, that's going to be an important piece of it, is to get the VVBs trained up and able to do this and add on a gender expert to the existing team. Perhaps that's the easiest way. But they'll only do that if the price makes it worthwhile.
Okay, I don't think I see any other major questions. I know we've, as I said, we've gone all over the place in terms of, the scope of this discussion, which I think is a bit of a demonstration of, we're the CGAP audience, which is traditionally a financial inclusion audience. Now we're talking about carbon markets, and we're talking about gender, and bringing all of these elements together. But this idea of, creating more of a demand, demonstrating that there is value in this gender focus seems to be something that, I think that's where we're landing in terms of what is needed as a next step. But yeah, Sandeep, I see your hand up, so I'm assuming you have something you want to say.
One quick 20-second point. I think there was a question on science.
Oh,
I
yes.
agree. We need to share, and I, as a project developer, and a lot of like-minded, we're happy to share a lot of data. A lot of us are sitting on tons of data. So please, if there is some grouping of academic bodies, gender experts, like I said, we're not the expert here. Jeanette is one. But again, we need more and more data to get more intelligence into our systems, and I'm not, it's not a pun on AI, but I'm just saying that, we need to get a bit more evidence-based, and there are tons of evidences that we can interpret from. And I think there is a play in a larger group level of actually all of us coming together, and I would be the first one to agree to it, something like that, where we start sharing data. We start sharing different kinds of inputs, outputs. We don't know what the interpretation is going to look like, but you guys are the experts there. So I think that's a very important piece. On-ground data rather than theoretical data is always a better way to make evidence-based financing work, and because a lot of seasoned financial players will not go by theoretical data. So you think it's no, but that's not good enough. Where is the actual reasoning behind it? So I think we need to spend some time on the science and data sharing amongst all of carbon market players, in the long run or short run, call you what you may. So I think
if I can just add on, Nisha, and I want to see more evidence looking at the link between environmental outcomes and gender equality and women's leadership. You mentioned, Liz, in the first slide, but there's very little evidence-based data on that. And I think, could that also drive the needle to get more climate-based investors to be convinced of this, that it's not this social, it's not a separate category. You don't do environmental outcomes on this side and then livelihood, which is the trap we've all fallen into. And it's time to really link the two and show the interconnection between those.
Yeah, I think that's a excellent point about trying to bring all of these elements together, keeping the women and the families at the center of it, and thinking about, okay, what are their financial needs? What are their livelihood needs? What is the opportunity that, carbon markets present, and how do we ensure that focus on the population group stays and that they benefit from it in a meaningful way? Because even within households, if we just go about, business as usual, then we know our financial systems and carbon projects and everything is designed to a default, which is often not women. So how do you ensure and integrate that perspective? And really leverage women as agents of change as well, right? They're not just the ones who are sort of excluded, and so they have a role to play. They can when they are able to benefit, we see a lot of impact on communities and households. I don't know if anybody wants to. We have 2 more minutes. This never happens in a webinar, that you're running ahead of time. So I want to see if there's one more key message from any of you. Liz, if you want to say a few words from CGAP's perspective, there's a minute.
Yeah, thanks to our speakers today for giving a lot of nuance to some of the insights we shared in the presentation, and also, sharing real life experience with the challenge of integrating gender into the carbon markets. I think this validates the need for more work. We've had the question about scientific research, evidence, data, consolidation of data on the value of data, on the value of having women participate in carbon projects. And I think that really sets us up, one is CGAP, to explore the 3 areas we talked about. But at the same time, it's a call for action across the board for all carbon stakeholders to sort of find solutions, carry out more research, and create initiatives for consolidating this data so that we can do more. I see Hasib has his hand up as well.
Go ahead,
Just
Hasib.
one last point, something Sandeep mentioned earlier is adaptation. We need to move away from this fetishism over just carbon and carbon credit, increasingly seeing the climate change impact across the world, especially in global south, where there are little resources to address the impacts of climate change or adapt to it. We need to integrate adaptation outcomes as part of project design and implementation and monitoring, hopefully moving forward.
Okay, that's a great note to end on, I think. Thank you, Hasib, Jeanette, Sandeep, Liz, and thank you all of you for joining. My colleague Sarah dropped a link to, I believe, to learn more about CGAP events. There'll be an evaluation at the end of this. We'd love to hear what you thought of this discussion, but continue to follow along. And as we embark on our journey of exploring this space and working on making carbon markets more inclusive and making sure that women are able to participate and benefit from them. So thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks.